now have this entire square block. And on the ground floors are all these businesses, a coffee shop, a restaurant, a printing company, moving company, all these things. And 14 floors up, you can live at least 3 years, and if necessary, you can live longer. What a mind-boggling idea that we could have available for domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking victims. So Lexington, maybe you don't need a whole city block, maybe you just need a few houses where you set it up. And at different locations you have the businesses because maybe it's not safe for them to live near where they are. Maybe you put their homes near the police substation or the sheriff's department. I love that model from Tampa, Florida. Boy, I tell you, even now I'd love to live right next door to the sheriff's department. I didn't always feel that way, but you have somebody stalking and terrorizing you, and pretty soon you decide, okay, even if I get 10 guns, I just kind of like the people who have even more than that for me. And how do we make sure they are protecting us, right? And that even if the perpetrator is a police officer, is one of the things that has come up from our work. We were just at a conference in Buenos Aires, and the advocates there were telling us, as in Mexico, where the police are paid so poorly, that when they were doing just domestic violence and sexual assault work, the police were actually willing to help them and would come and do rescues and support their work. Once they started going into human trafficking, now they're getting in trouble. Some of their advocates are getting beaten up. Some of them are being thrown in jail, harassed. Same thing, Musakoa, who does this work in Cambodia and Phnom Penh, has an anti-trafficking shelter. Once she started doing this work, because the police were getting a cut, right? This is part prostitution, and the traffickers know, just like when they sell drugs or guns, you give law enforcement a portion of that. So very dangerous for them to be involved in this work. So how do we protect each other? What are the ways that we're willing to do safety planning and that we acknowledge the importance of doing safety planning for ourselves as we do this work? And it's interesting in the law school how some people are very worried about this. You know, oh, is this going to put me in danger to do this work? Oh, you think if you're an investment banker, nobody's ever going to threaten you? Please, that stock goes down, they might shoot you. What was that guy in Atlanta got shot for doing that? You know, you're a defense attorney and you lose, their client might shoot you. So what, you want the safest job in the universe. So you think, okay, I will work for the IRS. I will just do taxes. Well, that guy in Austin flew the plane into the IRS, right, because he was so mad at them. You can't live your life, I just want the safest job I can possibly have. Pretty hard to find that. Okay, I'll try not to go off on my outrage about that. So every single one of you ought to have a copy. You ought to just carry it around with you all the time. You can download it off the internet. The 1948 Declaration. This is a mind-boggling document. What I love to do, I haven't done it yet in Phoenix, but I used to do it in Austin. My last few years, once I discovered all this work, was I would just carry copies of this. And if nothing else was really working in my argument to the court, I would argue dignity-based rights. Because, you know, they couldn't quite wrap their arms around, what, human trafficking? Even though in Texas we had a law about it, and we were able to get $30,000 for one victim, which was such a huge, huge win for us. But part of it was just getting the court to acknowledge, and because this is an international treaty to which the United States is a signatory, according to the US Constitution, this has higher weight than even a US Supreme Court decision. Oh, our judges were shocked to hear this. Ms. Buel, that's well and good, but why do I care what's going on at the United Nations and in 1948? Because it rules what you ought to be doing now. And if you look at all the provisions, oh my, excuse me, I get way too excited about this stuff. There are provisions about poverty, about human rights, including a right to food, physical safety, housing, things that you would say, really? We're supposed to be providing those? So if you can't think of any other argument, and this also will work well for you, those of you who are going to have to take a bar exam, if you don't know the right answer, just write 8 pages about human rights and domestic violence. Because those corporate lawyers who read those bar exams, I promise you it works, because there was some question on the Massachusetts bar exam about wills and estates. And I'm sure the law school doesn't want me to say this out loud, but I never took those classes. I didn't take tax, corporations, wills. I didn't take anything I didn't want to take. And everybody said, oh, this is going to come back to haunt you. Really? It hasn't so far. If I need that information, I call up somebody who knows it, because they're changing those laws all the time anyway. So I figured it'd be unethical for me to sit in one of those classes and take the seat from somebody who really cared about tax law and would stay awake at 10 in the morning, because if I had that job, I'm so happy people have it. One of my good friends from law school just made partners at tax law. Well, I say just. I've been out, 20-something years. So that was a long time ago. Anyway, she loves it. Great, I want ethical people doing tax law. It's just not for me. So don't feel obligated to take the classes that would just bore you to tears. So how did I get off on that? I don't know, but there's some good provisions. Look at Article 4. I mean, you gotta look at every one of these articles. Oh, I can't believe it's not coming through. Well, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Well, what do you think human trafficking is? It is slave trade. That's exactly what it is. Some domestic violence situations would constitute slavery. Not all. I don't want to exaggerate in any way. We have to be careful, make sure that we talk accurately about what goes on in domestic violence and sexual assault, but some of them do. If that applies in the case you're arguing, be sure to point out to your professor or the court that indeed this is a violation of Article 4 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So Kentucky, you ought to be very proud. You have some good statutes. Not all states have human trafficking statutes. So Kentucky Revised Statute, Section 529, you can just go into Google, put this in. Don't know about findlaw.com, Westlaw runs. You can look up statutes and laws too. So a person in Kentucky can be guilty of trafficking if they intentionally, so they have to have the intent. It can't just be they give somebody a ride on the side of the road, right? Subject one or more persons. So I love that in Kentucky, even one person. One person. Some states say it has to be a minimum of two. Kentucky, apparently in the legislative intent language, addresses that if there's one, there are probably more. But even if there's one, that fits the universal recognition of what this is. Class C felony unless there's physical injury or the person is a minor, which we think are good caveats to have. Then promoting human trafficking. Oh, sorry, I forgot to write in the section of this one. It's the one that comes right after the last one anyway. But so if you profit from trafficking or recruits, and this is a very important one that we're trying to get all states to have, because we know just like drug and other kinds of trafficking cartels, the top people always insulate themselves, right? So that they make somebody else take the fall. This allows us to get the top person who may have had nothing to do with recruiting the people from the other country or within the United States. Got lots of domestic trafficking going on as well, going to small towns. And we just had a meeting with representatives from the Navajo Nation. All kinds of gang and trafficking activity going on there because of the extreme poverty. They're just ripe for people going in and making promises. I'm from MTV in Hollywood, and they have a little bunch of pictures, and this is what you could look like, and they've got a little video that they just took off the internet or YouTube or something. But young people fall for this stuff, of course. This is, they're living in desperate poverty. So wanting to also be able to get every level of these trafficking enterprises and making sure nobody is just getting to skate. Very good. So I also want us to think about U.S. women's prisons that I'm delighted Amnesty International has cited as one of the greatest sources of human rights violations in the world because of the degree of sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape that happens, and our women there having virtually no recourse, nothing they can do. The numbers of women that I worked with in Massachusetts and in Texas who got pregnant in prison but had no kind of contact with outsiders. So what a puzzle. And then they would be charged with violating prison rules and not the guards. It was a case that got a lot of publicity out of Vermont where they charged the woman inmate who got pregnant. And I wrote a long article about effective and ethical representation of battered women in prison, if anybody wants to read the whole thing, or if you know of somebody who takes one of those cases and they're not sure what to do. But I guarantee you have battered women and trafficking victims in Kentucky jails and prisons that need and want your assistance, and I'm happy to talk with you about how we might put those together. We also, starting when I was in law school, started putting together a documentary called Defending Our Lives, chronicling the story of 8 battered women in Massachusetts prisons. And then we ended up winning an Academy Award for Best Short Documentary in 1992. Who knows? You see, when you start out doing the right thing, the world just falls at your feet, opens doors. We got all this money, and then all of a sudden the law school is willing to let us rent cars to drive to the prison instead of having to take 9 trains and 4 buses to get there. And the prison started letting us do more things. Pretty amazing. So we're happy to, you can also get that documentary called Defending Our Lives. I will tell you, probably one of the things I'm most proud of is I got fired from the Suffolk County DA's office as a prosecutor for working with battered women in prison. My boss said to me, you can't keep doing this. You know, your job is to put people in prison, not to get them out. Oh, that is not a prosecutor's job. Prosecutor's job is to do justice. And if the wrong people are getting incarcerated, my job is to get them out. But he didn't quite see it that way, and I am delighted that it took just about a nanosecond to say to him, you know, fortunately for me, I answer to a higher calling, and the person who writes my paycheck is not going to dictate my ethics. And you see, when you do the right thing, within 30 days, the elected DA of Norfolk County, Bill Delahunt, came to me and said, I would love to hire you, and whatever they were paying you, I'll give you $10,000 a year more. Yes, you see how it works? And it also meant that when I left, I got my $20,000 retirement that had accrued, and because the prison said, we will let out Shannon Booker and Lisa Grimshaw, 2 of the women featured in the documentary, if they have a job and a place to live. Oh, but they have no money. So I realized, well, I guess the reason I got fired so I could get my retirement account, and we can donate this to a shelter, they can hire them as advocates, we can set them up in an apartment, and people are saying, you can't give away all the money you have in the world. You are a single parent. You only make $21,700. How irresponsible of you. But what do they miss? Not only is one of the greatest joys in your life giving away your money, but the more you give away, the more comes to you. I can't believe what they pay me to be a law professor. Now, don't show this tape to my boss, but it allows me to give away at least 1/3 of my money, and it's so much fun to do. So it starts out with, who needs it? Yeah, battered women coming out of prison need a little help, because what do they get? $50. And if they've got a drug conviction, they can't get access to any financial aid, they can't get food stamps, can't get anything. They need your help. And I love some of you who also, one of my favorite singers, Patti LaBelle, has a fabulous song called When You've Been Blessed, Pass It On. And that's really kind of how I want to live my life, you know, just to really think on a daily basis, what can I give away? And not just, what do I not want anymore, but what does somebody else need that I have? And then what happens is something even better comes to you. It's worked with giving away cars and all kinds of things. I know my kids think I'm crazy, but that's okay. It works out. Oh, there's a fabulous University of Michigan Law School has this justice project. Oh my God, I cannot believe I have 11 minutes. Okay, so these are some of the necessary lenses through which we look at coercion and agency under the rubric of human trafficking, and really wanting to point out issues around poverty, around mental health. People sometimes expect, sometimes my students get upset that our victims that we work with, whether it's trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, they're not grateful. Oh, that's why you're doing this work. Now I want you to ask corporate lawyers, are their clients grateful? Do they thank them? They write a check for the $500 an hour and that's it. So this idea that we ought to have all this gratitude. Do we show each other such gratitude on a daily basis? I love what, oh, I'm forgetting his name. He was like assistant governor. It's not what they call it in Texas. But anyway, somebody asked him, how did you get so successful? He said, you know what I do one day every week for the last 50 years? I sit down and I write a handwritten note to everybody that week who I just need to thank for something. And it might be the custodian who, you know, I made a big mess in the front foyer by mistake, dropped my coffee. Just write him a note, you know, and so all these people have these original notes from somebody really famous. This too will happen to you. You will forget names that you know the person, but by the time you're 57, it will happen no matter how much echinacea or whatever else my sister tells me to take, I still happen. So whatever, the one I really want to focus on is individualizing our work, so that just because something worked with the prior trafficking or domestic violence or sexual assault victim, it may not work with the next one. Even if they're the same race, culture, age, whatever. Just be open to really listening. What does this survivor need? And it will hold you in good stead for other kinds of work as well. Oh, we're having a big trafficking conference March 11th, if anybody wants to come. You can read more about that. So a lot of what we're trying to do in trafficking now is figuring out these 3, prevention, prosecution, and disruption. And each of these, of course, is a huge, huge undertaking. So identifying, because some people aren't interested in the prosecution part, that's fine. Will they help us in the prevention? Well, that's a lot about anti-poverty.